I think we have to realize that what people are craving right now and what they're investing in, what people are kind of getting on a flight and going out to massive convention center to really be in the midst of is not an event or a conference. It's a meaningful shared experience, which I think is really interesting and why so many speakers who customize their keynotes are on more and more stages now, because you're getting something a little more custom and unique. You're really being seen for who you are, and you're getting more of that shared experience you can really apply to not just your work, but your life.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators podcast. I'm Seth Dechtman, your Keynote Curator. Our guest today is Shane Feldman. Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Seth. So excited to be here with you.
We are thrilled, and I truly mean that. You're a very unique voice in the world of keynote speaking, but really, I don't want to label you, but emblematic or representative of your generation, which we're going to get into, millennials, something that has really come to the forefront in every aspect of society, every industry, every generation is AI, artificial intelligence. And there's a lot there. It's polemic. There's a lot of conversations around it's going to take away jobs. It's going to make us less human. I want to hear what you have to say about artificial intelligence, but specifically, Shane, in the context of relationships, because I know how important relationships are for you and how you want to be the source of fomenting, encouraging, and helping grow and establish people being connected through relationships. So could you share with us a little bit about how you see artificial intelligence, which I know is a new keynote that you're delivering and have written, has to do with artificial intelligence and its relationship to relationships?
Sure. What a way to start things off. I mean, here's the thing about AI, very big buzzword right now. Everyone's talking about it. It's been around for a long time, right? Generative AI, what we're seeing with, the chat GPTs of the world right now feels much newer, but been around a really, really long time in all different shapes and forms. What's interesting and what I'm seeing, across my client base right now in terms of this questioning, this struggle, almost like an existential crisis in the making is this going to replace my employees, my company? And that's kind of where people are frankly freaking out right now. I think we all need to take a step back and realize that as human beings, relationships are all that we have. So if you think about business, any business in the world, what is it really? It is people coming together with other people to serve other people. It should be a celebration of humanity. The problem is so much of our business time right now, we've been caught up in the minutia of efficiencies. We have people acting like robots, right? Punching in numbers and doing things that perhaps is not actually leveraging their greatest skill set. So what I'm most excited about right now, thinking about the developments of AI, where we're headed, is we're going to have this incredible workforce that we're finally going to be able to leverage for all their talents, all their worth, so we can kind of get back to basics here on relationships, on connection. AI can't replace us because it's not human. And humans like dealing with other humans, right? That human default, that fundamental, element of being a social being isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do that well in science in school, but we're mammals. I don't think ChatGPT is, at least, the classes I took, right? I mean, I'm being
Right.
a little facetious, but what you point to is so important. It's a tool. It can even be a collaborator as these language models become more sophisticated and there's tone and they can distinguish, sarcasm and humor and irony and all these really subtle human things. They still can't take the human element away. And I would argue, and I think what I'm hearing from you is, Shane, is that this is an opportunity not to be afraid that we're going to be replaced, but to actually reconnect with an even more, the more humanness of us.
Yes, absolutely. And I think also taking a step back from that existential, crisis feeling and realize the same conversation was had during the dot-com boom, right? Oh my gosh, there won't be retail stores anymore. Everything's going to be online. Well, of course, you can still go to Macy's in person, right? And people still are. Or, when massive box stores started opening up and Amazon launched, well, that's the end of mom and pop shops. I happen to live in one of the biggest cities in North America, but I happen to be really close to a really cute main street. Let me tell you, 90% of it is filled with independent shops and they're all thriving. So this isn't the end or the beginning of anything. It's just the continuation. It's the evolvement. It's where we're going next. But to feel like this is the end of humanity, the end of business, is just a waste of your time and energy, right? That's like saying this new FTC law that's being spoken about with no more non-competes is the end of employee engagement. Well, if you are depending on legalities to keep your employees happy and engaged, that's your problem, right? So I think we got to dive deeper into what it means to be human, why our people want to come to work in the first place, and go all in on that.
Yeah, it's a great point, and go all in on being human. And you strike me as the type of person, Shane, that is all about relationships. And I've said this on other podcasts where we've had luminaries like you. You have been featured on Oprah and Larry King and Dr. Oz and in Forbes, and you've been named North America's top 40 under 40 LGBTQ leaders. And you're in high demand, speaking all over the world. And before we move on, I want to turn the corner a little bit on this conversation. But our listeners who have come back, share with everybody. This is going to be a really, as it already started out, a rich conversation in the deep end. Subscribe, like, engage, share with others, get them to subscribe and join the tribe and get related and create this relationship. Because Shane, we have ChatGPT, we have our Gmail, our calendars, Outlook calendars, Zoom meetings, Calendly, Siri, Alexa, all these tools that are structures to help us be optimal and efficient and productive. But the most powerful structures, the connective tissue that has us be human, is the relationship. And it strikes me that that's your core virtue, that's your core essence. How do you tie that into the work you do when you prepare for a meeting, when you're working with meeting professionals, when you want to dial in your message to really hit that bullseye and really calibrate the messaging of what you want to say for a keynote?
I like the use of the word calibrating there. That's really what it's about. And, every single time I meet with a meeting planner, we have a pre-call heading into an event. Of course, they have their logistics they want to work through, but I'm always focused on content because all of my keynotes are customized. What's interesting is, I'm not sitting down and writing a 60-minute script for myself. I have all these, I call them modules. So this isn't a
Sure.
fake background, it's a real background. There's all these pins behind me. And I've now researched on the ground in 100 different cities, towns, villages, crisscrossing 6 continents, what it means to be a community leader, a community builder, how you can essentially build better relationships with anyone from anywhere. And no stage has yet given me the time I would need to
Shane,
share.
I'm sorry. Shane, don't omit the fact that you've been recognized by the White House and the United Nations and all that. Don't just let that slide by, young man.
I,
Okay,
I'll,
all
I'll, I'll
right.
leave that's a humble bragging to you.
Right, but it is, over 100 countries, 6 continents, and you've done the research on the ground, and you have these amazing modules, which I'm well aware of. But I want our listeners to really get a deeper sense of that.
I appreciate that. And yeah, I'm waiting for an event planner to say that I have enough time on stage to share 100 stories from 100 places. Hasn't happened yet. So typically on the pre-calls, I ask a whole series, usually about a dozen questions, to really distill the key objectives, themes, what we really want the audience to do differently after the time we spend together. And that helps us together, me and the meeting planners, organizers, distill down and hand select, curate, if you will, 3 or 4 usually stories from 3 or 4 countries that are the best possible fit for that audience, that event, and that time. And so every keynote I deliver is a handful of different stories that come with different frameworks and strategies that lend themselves to relationship building. And I brand it as relationship building, but what are we really talking about in business? Retention, engagement, whether it's external, having more loyal customers and clients, or internally, it's about retention and engagement of your high performing teams and employees. So it can obviously be spun with different corporate language, but at the end of the day, across the board, it's all about those human to human connections and how we can turn every single touch point into an opportunity.
And these 100 countries, 6 continents, the White House, the United Nations, and on, is all, sourced from Count Me In, which is the world's largest millennial movement, led by millennials, largest World's largest movement led by millennials. Say that 1,000 times fast.
Fantastic. That's where
You
the
know,
whole
you
journey
did.
really started. Yeah. So I started Count Me In back almost 15 years ago now. And it was only ever meant to be a small project for students at the time, but evolved to be so much more, with chapters in 104 countries, more than 10 million young people, next generation leaders engaged in that movement. And I spent the better part of 10 years leading the organization as CEO as we scaled and ran broadcasts, and we have curriculum being used in a dozen different countries. And that early on afforded me the opportunity to travel to different cities, countries, to meet with our team members in different places. And that was the starting point for me, where I realized that even though community is universal and how relationships show up is very much universal, how they show up, how relationships are formed, and how they're nurtured is actually very different depending on how you were raised or where you were raised, your culture, beliefs, background, traditions. So I started picking up all these ideas and strategies and frameworks from different places as I was traveling, and kind of put on my researcher hat and realized, gosh, we have so much to learn back in North America and the westernized world from different cultures, different ways of life. And that really informed the way that I deliver keynotes today.
What are some, excuse me, I just sneezed. What are, there are, there's cultures, there's, I've been an expat for over 25 years, the overwhelming majority of my adult professional life. And I can identify with, there's nuance, not just country to country, but region to region. With the United States, Miami is quite different than Seattle. Seattle is quite
Sure.
different than Pocatello, Idaho. Saskatchewan is different than Newfoundland. Costa Rica is very different than Nicaragua, and on and on. What are some of the surprising, even unique distinctions that were uncovered for you that you've been able to leverage? And if I could even take it further down the runway, that meeting professionals might be able to utilize in their day to day, because they're dealing with employee engagement, they're dealing with attendee engagement, they're dealing with having them have a career path that's visible and that they feel taken care of and safe. And the attendees know that they can come to the events they're creating, so that they're going to network and have those relationships expand in their professional community, and on and on. And the work that you've done at Count Me In kind of dovetails into all of that. But I'd love to hear and know some of the unique ones, or some of the ones that just pop into your mind, because what strikes me so much, there is a question at some point here, Shane. What strikes me so much is that Count Me In has impacted lives over time. And that is no small thing. And that's what we all try to do in in the world of events, is not just inspire somebody and then they go off for a coffee break or to check their email before the next breakout session, but that impact, that transformation can be inhabited and carried with you over time. So, question, editorial comment, but help me clean that up.
Yeah, I love that. Event planners, it's not just an event where what we're really doing is we're architecting shared experiences. And that has the opportunity to transform someone's life, to change their career trajectory. It's a huge, huge opportunity. And one of my favorite stories, not just for event professionals, but I often end up sharing this story when I'm opening a conference, when I'm the opening keynote, was from my time in Vietnam. So, one of my favorite takeaways from that story is how in Vietnam, whenever I was traveling through the country, regardless of the town, village, city I was in, whenever someone noticed that I was alone, they'd always invite me to join their group. And I thought it was kind of interesting at first, a little awkward, but I started to realize it was happening 95% of the time. And when I dove into the research, I realized that in Vietnam, they actually value collectivism as a country. In many ways, it comes from communism, but how it shows up is they see individuals as secondary to groups. So, one thing that I noticed in the US, whenever we gather together people we know, we often form these tight circles, right? You can picture it, people standing in a circle, talking, catching up. In Vietnam, they're always half circles, as if with their group body language, they're saying a group is never complete. There's always space for someone to join and
Mm.
be a part. And so, just one key micro shift we can all make to keep our physical, or perhaps metaphysical circles open, whether it's a virtual event, in person? How do we ensure that when someone is new, maybe isn't part of the community as much, they don't see a bunch of backs turned to them and have to summon all this confidence and courage to break into that pack, but rather they can effortlessly step into that gap in a group and start listening and kind of just ease their way into the conversation, right? Little shifts, these what I call micro interactions, the tiny, seemingly insignificant moments stitched between the larger milestones and projects are actually what matter most. So it's how we can level those up and turn those touch points into greater opportunities for connection and relationship.
That image of the circle, the metaphor I think of is a door or window that's open. It's so contrary and it's such strong contrast to the Occidental, the Western world, where I'm just thinking, I've been at sound checks with the speaker and, they need their quiet time, their alone time, which is completely valid, understandable, warranted, justified. But in Vietnam, you might have a little bit of a hard time getting out isolated and because, you're being, summoned, if you will, to join an open circle. That is really,
Sure.
really
And in a
interesting.
sense, I should make a distinction. This isn't about the introvert extrovert spectrum, right? Wherever you fall on the introvert extrovert spectrum, however you best recharge is irrelevant when it comes to your human innate need for meaningful connection with others, right? So, sure, I'm introverted myself. I love to recharge alone on a walk or with a book, but I still need to fuel my connection. I can't be in isolation for days or weeks on end. So sure, some speakers may need their quiet time before, but you still need other meaningful interaction with others. The tricky part is there are so many people in our midst right now who feel slightly on the edge or slightly isolated. And if we're not paying attention, if we're not open to that, that's when you start to have people slip through the cracks. That's when you have burnout, people not sharing when they're struggling, people leaving an organization or not returning to an event when they don't feel connected, they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard. And if all of our circles are closed, it's much harder for those people to find their way in.
It makes me think of something that we've talked about a lot on the podcast about, hybrid, remote, future of work, call it what you like. But with this next iteration of working, whether you're an owner, an employee, freelancer, there's arguments for back to the office, no remote or all remote or hybrid. And I think it's not a one size fits all. But what you just alluded to is something that I've been banging the drum about because first of all, I just can't believe that, you relate to yourself as an introvert. Not that I can't believe it, but what I can't believe is how many keynote speakers who are in high demand like you, event professionals who plan big meetings and need to deal with large groups of variety of vendors, sponsors, convention center, AV, security, catering, food and beverage, and they relate to themselves as introverts.
It's
It's like
balance. It's about
like
balance, right?
and we've thrown the term around ambivert, because
Yeah,
you can access the extrovert in
sure.
you when it's needed or when you consciously need that extra plug-in. But where I'm going with the future of work is in this isolation, and as you said, you have to be aware. It's not the leader's job to be the babysitter. Are you okay, Johnny? Jenny, are you okay? Are you okay? But you got to have your eyes open. You got to have your ears open. You got to
Mhm.
have that ability to read, they call it read the room, emotional intelligence, gestures, what's not being said. And in a remote only workplace, you can detect that or plug into it, but it's more challenging and requires new skills. That's one piece of it. The magic of being in person, Shane, is that electricity. I'm walking down the hall and I see you and I say, hey, is Billy okay? I saw him in the break room and, he just looked, I could be me, like we do a check in. You know what? I saw the same thing, Seth. Those kind of things are the electricity that happens in person in the parking lot, in the elevator, in the break room, at lunch. How are you seeing that being played out with the clients and the people that you're working with?
I mean, it's not just my clients, it's my own teams, right? So back in the day, it
Right.
was count me in. We had, members all over the world, and sometimes I was flying to meet with them, but many times it was just digital. Right now, I'm working at on a few startups. One in particular, a fintech company and I have employees in 3 different countries and 3 different time zones. And so it's entirely remote. There is no office. How do we keep those people engaged and connected and build all the trust and rapport that you want? There's lots of tools that we employ, that I've employed with my team to help bridge some of those gaps. But a lot of them are just simple things that don't take extra software, don't take a ton of extra time. Actually, when I was living amongst, you're not going to believe this. It's hilarious even to say out loud. But I was living amongst traditional Zulu tribes in a remote village in South Africa, and I kid you
You
not.
know what, Shane, I'm sorry. We've people have lived amongst pygmies, all sorts of marine life. Like, so, there's room for everybody here. So,
There is.
you're with the Zulus, bring them along.
Okay, but the wildest part is this traditional off the grid Zulu tribal leader is the one that helped me rethink my email of all things. And I think sometimes it takes that kind of disconnect to realize how backwards we're actually using common everyday tech. Email was actually originally invented as a relationship building tool. Today, it's almost entirely transactional. We send like
Yeah.
one line, one word emails to get what we need, or Slack messages, whatever it is. And so this elder helped me realize that I was missing a key component, especially for my remote teams. And that's what we called a hook. And so now almost every single email, 90% of the time when I'm writing to someone, right after I write their name, hey, Seth, I write what I call a hook, which has nothing to do with the contents of the email, but it's something personal, sometimes an open-ended question, sometimes an icebreaker, just to kind of recognize you're human, I'm human, we're having a human experience. So one of my favorites, especially on Mondays, is, hey, what was one highlight from your weekend? And a lot of people don't ignore it, right? Like they don't even respond to it. They just go
Sure.
to right to the main message in the
Right
email.
to the transaction.
Let me tell you, it matters. Like these hooks matter. And I had an employee at my last company. I was doing this hook, and he was a total A-type personality. Many people like him. Like always ignored the hook, never responded, just wanted to get into the efficiency of work. But then one morning, Monday morning, I asked one highlight from your weekend, and he responded instantaneously, not just with what I'd asked for, but he finished by saying, "Oh, by the way, thanks for asking how my weekend was. Actually, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, so I'm not
Mm,
in a great place right now." And so
mm,
immediately I got on the phone with him, showed up, asked what I could do to better support him if he needed to flex some time. But I know this person, and many people like him. And the amount of courage it would have taken to share that out of the blue is astronomical compared to that door being open, right? And it just
yeah.
being a response to a question.
Yeah.
So even when people ignore your hooks, they matter. Make sure that you're bringing some of that humanity back into your email, especially with remote teams. It's the quickest way to elevate the trust and rapport you need, so they share what's actually going on when they're struggling or when they have wins that are to be
Yeah.
celebrated.
One of the things that I also hear in that is that whether they respond or not, your commitment is, to have that opening, like
Mhm.
the half circle. So you ask, you could send 100 emails. It could be the 101st until, hey, my mom is going through this and I'm not in a great place. But you've softened the ground, you disarm, and you've just been consistently available. It's really beautiful. It's really powerful. That's what I call leadership, where you're available, and then of course you pick up the phone, and you let them be known and heard, and provide what you can, whether it's flex time, as you said, or not. But that's important, because you're right. It is transactional. We've had some others on our podcast that have talked about, and I'm guilty of it. And I've tried. I'm the largest room in the house is room for improvement. One of my rooms for improvement is email. I can often get in the one word or four word response and
Mhm.
move on. And it's not kosher. Not because I look bad, because it's not honoring my team or
Right.
my people I'm communicating with. So that's
We gotta
that's really
honor
cool.
ourselves too, though. This stuff is hard, right? Like to build these habits, that's what they are. But we're talking about Kearney just did a global study on the lack of joy people are feeling at work. Now, 37% people report feeling any kind of joy at work, which some people out there will say that's not too bad, but that's like a 53% joy gap when you think of the 97% of employees that really they crave a feeling of joy. They expect to feel joy at work on a given day. And the easiest way for us to insert a little more joy is to focus on those more human to human experiences, right? How we're
Yeah.
building that trust, how we're opening up those doors. And a tool I love to use, which psychologists call appropriate self disclosure, is really just knowing when I can also openly share things as a leader myself, right? So maybe
Right.
I'm going through a difficult time right now
Right.
with my family, right? And that's
Right.
okay. That doesn't make you weak as a leader. It makes you courageous. It makes you
Right.
strong. Vulnerability is how we start to bridge that divide.
Right. I guess there is a fine line of responsible oversharing, and you have to find that
Sure.
sweet spot and maybe lean on and mentors or other people that you trust to kind of get some guidance on that. But for sure,
Yes,
for
but closing off
sure,
entirely is not the way, right? We are long gone from the era of that cold leadership, right? We need humans at the forefront who share not just the wins, but also some of those struggles and challenges along the way.
yeah. Which we can come full circle to the beginning of the conversation, which is I know your new keynote is called AI Passport. Is that right?
AI passport, yep. Or, for those that are like, we have enough of AI, future proof passport. There's so many stories and strategies to choose from. It's just really an umbrella under which we build that custom keynote together.
Right. It's the context is decisive. I mean, major brands, Disney, Google, and so many more, they've actually implemented your leadership passport. Is that right?
Yep.
You
Yeah.
know,
So
and
all these
and
frameworks is just how we're elevating and building better relationships at every single touch point.
what do you think, in your estimation, from that framework would be the top one or two power moves or boss moves? I'm showing my age. Who uses the word boss? Like in the old sense, that's boss for meeting professionals, whether they're architecting a new event or deploying a current event or debriefing one. What would you like them to know about that type of framework?
Mm. What I think is helpful is we need a bit of a perspective shift right now as we're entering the 2025 events that we're planning on right now. I think we have to realize that what people are craving right now and what they're investing in, what people are kind of getting on a flight and going out to massive convention center to really be in the midst of is not an event or a conference. It's a meaningful shared experience. And so on stages, when I talk about this in a corporate context, I call it a plus one experience. So just think of the difference between watching an Oscar worthy film alone on Netflix versus lining up for the midnight premiere, maybe even dressed in costumes like they did for Star Wars or Harry Potter, or the difference between listening to your favorite artist in like the best Bose noise canceling headphones in your bedroom versus being in the arena where it happens. And it's hard to describe, when you ask people why they go to the arena, because it's not for perfect audio quality. Your headphones are better, but it's for the connection to other fans. Some people call it euphoric or magical. It's really hard to describe, but I call it a plus one experience. And when we go to a conference, a corporate event, a meeting, we want that same kind of shared experience. So if you are stacking a lineup, speaker after speaker after speaker, no breaks, no between time, no networking, people aren't going to have that opportunity for connection. If you have a bunch of speakers that don't allow for interaction, they aren't actually really communicating with the audience. They're just kind of performing on the stage for an hour. That's becoming less and less appealing to most audience members. The same way that I've had 4 or 5 event planners just in the last month tell me that they're not interested in hiring keynotes who are just going to deliver what their audience can watch on YouTube, which I think is really interesting and why so many speakers who customize their keynotes are on more and more stages now because you're getting something a little more custom and unique. You're really being seen for who you are, and you're getting more of that shared experience you can really apply to not just your work, but your life. Hopefully, leaving with not just a concrete next baby step you can take to improve your work efficiency or your relationships, but you're also leaving hopefully with a new friend, a new connection that you can actually use as kind of an accountability partner to take action after the conference. I think that's
Yeah,
really what we're looking for right now.
that those are some great ways to see it, and a great framework, a great way to contextualize it. I too have heard recently and since the pandemic that why bring in a speaker? especially since everything went to Zoom or went on a digital platform, virtual platform. Many of, let's say, the CFO types are like, see, we didn't need to pay X amount of money and bring them in and wine them and dine them and pay for their effort in the hotel. We can do it on a virtual platform. There is such a value in that large group shared experience that even though you might get a similar, let's say similar, not perfectly tailored, the speaker might be the same speaker, might be a different message live, but there
Right.
is some spark and some
Absolutely.
real different energy and a different learning experience and a different connecting experience when it's in person. So while I hear what the meeting professionals are saying, I what I hear is that the stakes are higher for keynote speakers.
Mhm.
They don't want the 100 level freshman year keynote. They want more engagement, more value, whatever that is, a takeaway that can be implemented immediately and make a difference over time, as opposed to, hey, let me just tell my one note story, you know?
Right. Yeah, and less origin stories, I think. There's less and less of look at me. There's more and more. We want captivating, high energy strategies, right? Keep our audience engaged, tell amazing stories with great imagery, and then help us understand some things that we can actually do that aren't going to take 7 months to implement or big budgets, things that I can do on my own today, whether I'm frontline or management, to actually move the needle 1%, 2%, 5% into elevating relationships, retention, loyalty, these kinds of connection points we're talking about. And then one note, if you are a meeting planner listening or watching right now, and you had a CFO come to you recently and say, let's just do virtual, we don't need in person anymore. That's what the last few years taught us. I would go back to that CFO and say, well, are you okay never eating in restaurants ever again? Because you were okay with that for several months there, right? We all made sacrifices. We all dealt with what we needed to deal with. It didn't mean that that was going to be okay forever, right? I think we have to remember that a lot of people use that phrase, the new normal. I disagreed with that phraseology from the beginning. I think there's always evolvement, right? We're always moving and
Yeah.
changing and evolving, but there are also some
Change is
sacrifices that were
progress.
made, right? Change is progress, but there's also some elements there that like we just did what had to be done, right? No
That's
restaurants, no
right.
big events. It doesn't mean we don't crave it. It doesn't mean it doesn't make the world of a difference and pack massive ROI when it comes to engagement, whether it's an internal or an external conference. It makes a really big difference when you have the capacity to do that in person.
Shane, what I'm present to is that, your life's work, it's cross generational, but it's fostering these genuine connections and this sense of community, whether it's among attendees at a conference or the 100 countries and 6 continents that you've been to, but most importantly, how you've been able to dial in your message to this increasingly digital and distracted world. It's great to have you not only on this podcast and be available for our tribe, who, again, if you haven't subscribed but you're listening, please do. This is such a rich conversation. And, whether it's the energy industry, oil, healthcare, financial services, education, agriculture, your message, in this digital and distracted world is just universal. I want to finish on just one big idea for you to leave us with. You have a certain specialty. It's not your defining element around millennials and what that generation, where it's headed, where it's come from, how to best access the workforce. What can you share with our listeners, our tribe, about what you want them to know going forward about generations, the workforce, kind of an open ended? I'd love to hear what it is that you're chomping at the bit to provide to people that's going to make a difference for them.
Well, I will say that every generation sees the world through a different lens, much like growing up in a different country gives you the ability to look at the world through a different lens. And the one thing that is so important for us to remember is that even if people see the world in a different way, it's up to us to put in the time and effort to better understand how that person's framework works. What is their view of the world so we can better meet them where they're at. That's what the best managers do, it's what the best leaders do. we think about this in the frame of recognition, if you're recognizing everyone the same way, you're going to be putting some people in some uncomfortable spots. Some people love being in the
Yeah.
spotlight. Others would prefer just a quiet note that says, "Thank you so much. You did excellent today." Right. So if we aren't showing up and better understanding who our people are and what they're craving, regardless of their generation, regardless of our preconceived notions about their generation, of being so careful not to share any generalizations, because while statistics can be helpful, they don't necessarily speak to your employees or your team members. So we just have to put in that time and effort to really get to know our people, how they want to be recognized, how they want to be celebrated, and importantly, what kind of support they need. As long as they see that, we're going to see that we're elevating the trust and rapport that we have with them, and those people will stick around for a really long time.
Acknowledgement I've always felt is a creative act. And in a cynical, resigned world, a lot of people, when they receive acknowledgement, they're like, what does Shane want? Or what does Seth want? And it requires, a real creativity, and there has to be the relationship there. But you're right. Some people want the note, some people want it in another form, which, if we can bring it full circle, only speaks to why that human element, that human intelligence is just so much more valuable, because a chat bot, as much as you can feed it and give it direction, doesn't have that human element to it. So I think that your message that you just gave is important and impactful. And just thank you for, taking the time to think of something so worthwhile for our listeners.
You got it.
So
It's my honor.
yeah. Well, Shane, we're coming to the end of the conversation here. I just want to thank you for you're always so joyful. And, I'm just present to your gratitude of just being alive and, having the opportunity. I know everything isn't rose colored and rainbows and unicorns in anybody's life, but knowing that just on a baseline, we all have our challenges, that you are so conscious to bring a positive energy in every interaction, and including this podcast. So thank you. Thank you for the work you do. But most importantly, thank you for the work that you're going to be doing in the lives that you're going to be impacting. It's just extraordinary.
Oh my gosh. Well, it is absolutely my pleasure. And the joy is real and genuine. I do have to say, definitely not all rose colored glasses. When you're traveling, researching the world, things happen, things go awry, whether it's wicked food poisoning or being held hostage by a warlord in a remote part of Africa. I've had my challenges and those really, really difficult days. But if nothing else, they bring light to just how awesome it is that I get the privilege of doing this work, of supporting so many companies, and importantly, the wonderful people behind those companies, and just elevating the relationship and humanity so we can all show up at work a little bit lighter, a little bit happier, and feeling like we're making a difference in the world.
Yeah. Not another warlord story. I mean, come on, really? And to our listeners, thank you for returning. Thank you for trusting us with your time and coming back for these rich conversations. For our first timers, we appreciate the opportunity to provide these insights and these tips and these different viewpoints for you. Please tell your neighbor, tell your teacher, tell your cousin, your pharmacist, your milkman, your grocer, your baker, your banker, everybody, because when you listen to the Keynote Curators podcast, you're smarter for it. See you next time.